General Roger Newberry, renowned for his role in the Revolutionary War, received land from the Connecticut Land Company in 1798. As the president of the company, Newberry was awarded 1,000 acres in the original Talmadge Township. In 1798, he came to the area to plot out his land. But as a new conflict with England arose, he concluded his arrangements and returned to Connecticut, but chose not to participate in the war. Sadly, he never came back to the region and passed away in his home in 1814. Henry Newberry received land as an inheritance following his father Roger Newberry's passing. Upon his father's demise, he promptly visited the area to inspect his newfound property. Henry was captivated by the stunning surroundings and decided to sell his Connecticut land and finalize all loose ends before making the move. It took a considerable amount of time. Exactly a decade later, he relocated to Manchester, which would later be known as Cuyahoga Falls, with his family and his father's plans in hand. Henry initially settled on the south shore of Silver Lake, where he lived for 2 years before relocating to a house near the intersection of Portage and Front Streets, where he resided for 12 more years. In 1834, he began construction on his spacious new home on the hilltop at the far eastern end of Broad Street, overseeing the river, with George Lodge as the builder. The family moved into the completed home in 1840, naming it Florence Villa. The mansion's exterior featured red sandstone sourced from the north bank of the gorge, just west of Mary Campbell's Cave. The door sills were crafted from solid black stone, while the massive 3-inch thick front door boasted hand-carved panels. Supported by 4 pillars made of local forest wood, the porch had wide stone steps adorned with carved stone scrolls on each side. The roof timbers were hand-hewn and assembled with wooden pegs. Inside, an elaborate spiral staircase ascended to the second floor from a spacious hallway, dividing 2 drawing rooms. Inside the house, white marble mantels adorned each room, accompanied by sparkling chandeliers featuring numerous glass pendants. The rooms, once parlors and music rooms, showcased full-size roses and leaves in central medallions, while 3 tiers of moldings encircled the walls. Following Henry Newberry's passing in 1853 and his wife Elizabeth's in November 1858, their daughters sold the property to James H. Cook. Renowned as the Cook House, it quickly fell into disuse and closure. One can only imagine the tales whispered among the village children as they gazed up at the grand empty mansion perched on the hill. In March of 1889, Helen Rucker, the wife of Reverend Rucker, acquired the Cook property for $12,000 and transformed it into a private girls' school named Devereux Hall. Unfortunately, Mrs. Rucker passed away in 1891. In both 1883 and in 1894, the 18-room mansion was wanted by the Grand Lodge of the Pythias of Ohio. After planning repairs and modifications, they planned on establishing it as the Pythian Widow and Orphans' Home. Both times, the plans fell through. A few years later, it housed an alcoholic recovery home for an experiment called the Keeley Cure. This consisted of patients receiving injections of bichlorides of gold 4 times a day. Later, the house was taken over by Dr. William Searle, an eminent specialist in mental disorders who, in association with Dr. Irving Kozar, conducted a private sanitarium called Fair Oaks Villa. Many stories reached throughout the township on maltreatment and unusual behavior. Despite all the strange and wild practices that took place in the 20th century, the importance of the mansion goes back to when Henry had the house built. Our first mayor and church founder's mansion was also a large part of the Cuyahoga Falls Anti-Slavery Society. The Newberry Mansion had a tunnel running from the house to the nearby river that was used to hide fugitive slaves during the Underground Railroad period. This is just one of the homes and churches that played a part in freeing slaves from the South. Cleveland was considered the North Star for many fugitive slaves. As early as 1815, runaway slaves began arriving in the western reserve ports on their way to Canada. Most slaves could not read or write, so they followed the North Star. One of the 3 main routes came through New Philadelphia, Massillon, and on into Cuyahoga Falls and Hudson before heading northward to Cleveland. There was a decent amount of help provided with the use of homes, churches, stores, tunnels, and alleyways. In the 1836 report of the American Anti-Slavery Society, headed by Ogden Wetmore, has 50 Cuyahoga Falls members listed. One can assume there were at least a handful more by the time the house was built 4 years later. However, assistance given by the fall sites was kept extremely quiet because the township wasn't a straight anti-slavery community. There were a multitude of Klansmen in the area. It appears that the townspeople knew how each other stood on the issue, but they didn't want to risk someone burning their homes down or causing other damage, which was known to happen. Unfortunately, in 1956, a decision was made to tear down a large piece of our history. As the demolition crew were working, they encountered a tunnel beneath the house. They could not follow it because most of it had been filled in and sealed. The tunnel led in the direction of the river, which fits the spoken history that has followed the house's grand and sometimes desolate tale. As recently as 2020, a trace of the tunnel was discovered again. An updated report will be posted when available.